What's up, my friends, and welcome into a brand new Phillies podcast. We call it affectionately the Run It Back Phillies podcast here. It's myself, Tyler Zulli, Frank Klose as well, and we are really excited to get this thing off the ground because we figured with all the word spread of running it back this year. Are the Phillies running it back? Rob Thomson has kind of had a rebuttal to that a little bit. We'll talk about that. But we're going to do this once a week. We're going to get into some Phillies talk. We'll deep dive into the numbers a little bit. We'll talk about this team as a whole. And Frank, I got to tell you, I am very excited to do this with you. When you called me the other day, I was kind of chomping at the bit to get back in and do some Phillies talk, do some baseball talk. So I'm very excited to get the show off the ground with you.
Yeah, very excited to work with you too. And certainly it's been a while since I really got to do the podcast thing. After my dad was sick and passed away, I never really got to resume it. But I think hope springs eternal in 2026. And I'm really excited to talk more Phillies this year.
I think my headline for the Phillies season this year, because you just used half of it, is hope springs eternal, ... But hope's not a strategy. And that's something I think you and I will talk about throughout the year as we kind of get a feel for what the outfield is going to look like, as we get a feel for what the back end of the rotation is going to look like. Where have the Phillies improved? Where do you think that there's still needs? And I think that running it back is a great place to start. If that's the name of the podcast and that's the name of how we're going to handle this. And I think that's a really great place to start this year because Rob Thomson was pretty frank about his the verbiage run it back. He brought up how they've added to the bullpen. He brought up how they have a new center fielder, how they have a new right fielder. And the thing that I keep coming back to, Frank, is it's not necessarily the names on the back of the jerseys, right? It's something like 23 or 24% of the Phillies roster this season is new in terms of namesake, in terms of the bullpen structure, in terms of, as he said, a new center fielder, a new right fielder. To me, it's not necessarily about the namesake per se. It's about the theory of the lineup. And that's where I sit with they are technically running it back, even if it's not necessarily the same guys. You do have a new right fielder in Adolis Garcia. You do have a presumed new center fielder in Justin Crawford. They've added Brad Keller. They've made some shrewd moves in the bullpen to acquire a couple of maybe under the radar guys, Kyle Backus, and picking up Zach McCambley in the Rule 5. But I think when people say run it back, the theory right now is it feels like it's going to be a same structure to the lineup. And that's where I kind of sit with running it back.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. To me, the thing that they were absolutely missing last year was that right-handed bat hitting number 4. Alec Boehm has kind of been miscast as that. And it kind of seems like because they may not necessarily have any other options. Now, maybe Garcia ends up being more than one might expect based on his performance the last couple seasons. And maybe he claims that role, but there's no guaranteed right-hand bat to slot in behind Harper and Schwarber, whichever way they put them in order. There still needs to be that right-handed bat to really make them see some pitches. And the lack of pitches Bryce Harper has seen is really an indictment on the lineup as a whole. And again, just Alec Boehm, I really like Alec Boehm. I like his bat. He makes a lot of contact. But if he was hitting 7th on this team and you knew he was going to hit 7th on this team, you'd feel really good about it. But there's the back and forth. Well, he struggles for a little bit in the 4-hole. Real Muto's hot, so we're going to throw him there. Or it just seems like there's just this constant tinkering in that one spot. And I think that was the one thing that might have given this lineup a very different feel heading into 2026, if they got that right-handed bat to hit 4th.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And you almost went a step further than I did because I've been saying all offseason, if Bohm's a 6-hitter, you've got a pretty good team. You even took it to the 7, which is a fair place to be because I think Alec Boehm has a lot of good qualities offensively. As you said, good bat-to-ball skills, doesn't strike out a lot. Now, the walks will never be there. The home runs will never be there. He is a guy who likes to go after the first pitch very frequently. Just over 3.5 pitches per plate appearance last year for him. He's usually down towards the bottom of the league in terms of qualified hitters and pitches seen plate appearance. To me, there's value in Alec Boehm. It's just he's miscast in where that value is being placed. If a guy like Alec Boehm is hitting 6th in your team and you do truly have a legitimate cemented top 4, I think that's a good place to be. I could even find myself in a spot where I say he's hitting 5th, and you're in an okay spot. But in that traditional lineup sense, where your four-hole hitter is your run producer, is your power bat, is the guy that kind of cleans up, in the sense of being the cleanup hitter. I think that he is not that. There is value to Bohm, but it's not in the four-hole, and I think we are probably on a collision course unless something changes with the lineup. We are on a collision course for him to probably be the opening day four-hole hitter once again.
Yeah, obviously, if the Bo Bichette thing had worked out, we'd be speaking very differently.
Sure.
And I think that deal falling apart, and especially Bichette going to the Mets, I think that's led to a lot of the run it back talk, because that was the one hope, I think, for a lot of Phillies fans, to see something different. And the way that it fell apart, the Phillies thinking they had a deal, then the Mets getting desperate and just jumping in and throwing lots of money, and to the point where he couldn't say no. Obviously, the Phillies probably were not in a position to match that deal, because they'd be paying 110% luxury tax on that $42 million. And that's,
Sure.
You're not paying 85, 86. No, more than that. Anyway, that's my quick math. But you'd be paying way, 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 way too much for 1 year of Bo Bichette. So I can't fault them for that a little bit. But, when I look at the whole situation and Alec Bohm, the fact that he's going to be a free agent after this year made him somebody that made sense to move, because one thing a lot of teams do, especially they do well in Tampa Bay with the Rays, is if you're approaching free agency, they cash out and trade you before you get there. But I have to think too that the Phillies recognize that value you just spoke of in Alec Bohm. They were under no obligation to just trade him for trading him's sake, and they have something there, but doesn't really solve that lineup spot. Now, in the back of his mind, Dave Dombrowski could be thinking, okay, well, I can just solve any needs at the trade deadline. Maybe Garcia works out in right field, and maybe he gets his bat back. Maybe he finds himself as the answer in the four-hole. That could be what he's thinking, but it doesn't necessarily inspire a lot of confidence among the fan base. Although, let's be honest, this is still a pretty good team with a lot of really good players, and I don't think anybody realistically thinks that the Phillies are going to all of a sudden win 76 games. I think that, at this point, with all the expectations set, knowing that they tasted the World Series in 2022, people are really thirsting for that World Series and nothing else. So it's almost like, all right, let's fast forward all the way to October and get on to the next October. I think that's where the fan mindset is right now.
The one guy you bring up, Adolis Garcia, to me is the easiest way for all of this to fall into place. If there is a resurgence, and I don't know if I can ask for 2023, because we're going on 3 seasons ago, and that was a guy that when you watched him in the World Series, when you watched him in that season leading up to the World Series, that was a different player. That was this guy might be one of the top 10 hitters on the planet at this current moment type of hitter. If there's a resurgence to a mid-20s home runs, right? You talk about 23 to 25, drives in 75 to 80 type of runs. I think that's the easiest way to stretch this lineup. But my concerns have been all of the metrics go in the wrong direction. And to me, the biggest concern, it's really not the low OBP. It's not the low average, because you could live with those things if the guy is driving in runs. And last year, the Rangers did not score any runs. 2023, they were one of the best offenses in baseball, and it's why they won the World Series. Last year, they were a pitching-heavy team with really good top-end starting rotation. Nate Eovaldi and Jacob deGrom, and they had a bunch of guys who really carried their rotation. They just struggled to score runs. Seager had a down year. Simeon had a down year. Adolis Garcia continues to go in that wrong direction. So when I think about Garcia, the thing that really worries me the most is not necessarily the on-paper production, it's the bat speed. The bat speed has slowed down by over a mile an hour since 2023. Something in the 73s, it's down into the 72s. And I know if you think about it, it's like, well, it's 1 mile an hour, it's not that big a deal. In terms of bat speed, it is. It really is that big of a deal when you drop that far. So my concern would be, is he not catching up the fastballs as much? Is he not turning on the baseball as much? And I think that is a big indicator as to why his numbers have gone in the wrong direction, because he is a guy who chases a lot. He's a guy who now is starting to swing and miss more. And all of those underlying metrics, I think are due in part because of his bat speed slowing down. I think the easiest solution for the Phillies to have a structured lineup the way they hope is that Garcia is a closer version of 2023 than he is of 2025. I don't see it happening. I hope that I'm wrong for this team's sake, but that's my big concern is I think they're putting a lot of eggs in the basket of a guy who they're hoping has some kind of resurgency. And as I said at the top, hope's not a strategy.
Yeah, that he was their annual $10 million gamble. Last year was Max Kepler. Obviously, that didn't really work out as they had hoped. And then he won't even.
And I'll say this: I'll take the gamble on Garcia over the gamble on Kepler. Like if you say ceiling, Garcia's ceiling is much, much higher. But I do think the floor could almost be lower.
Well, I got to ask you this, though, because speaking of running it back, people wanted Harrison Bader back on this Phillies team.
Yeah.
It kind of ended up being an either-or proposition. I think Harrison Bader at the time was asking for too much money in too many years. Maybe he priced himself out of the Phillies initially because, maybe the lineup looks a lot different with Bader in center and then Crawford gets left and then your right field is where you platoon Marsh. I like that better, I think, but what do you think of the Phillies deciding to go that route instead of just waiting out and maybe trying to keep Bader and run back Bader?
Yeah, it felt like to me that you're right. Bader probably initially asked. My guess would be he asked for a third year based on the way that he talked about how he loved his time in Philly, but also how he wanted to find a home. He didn't want to be a mercenary type of guy. My guess is he asked for a third year. I think the Phillies, probably much like most teams, considering he got a 2, probably balked at a third year because the money, the 12, what is it, the 10 and a half, $11 million a season, it's really not that bad. I thought he would get 3 for almost 45.
And I had him at 339 personally, but I think he was asking 345.
Right. So I think they looked at it and said, we have to make a decision quickly to get somebody that we favor. And I think when Garcia became available for the 1 year, the chance deal, I think they took that opportunity. And now they're putting themselves in a position where I like Justin Crawford a lot. I think Justin Crawford is a really, really good baseball player. And I think the type of player that he is still has value in Major League Baseball. I know it's about pop and launch angle and, how many home runs do you hit? And he's a near zero launch angle guy. It remains to be seen if the balls that he puts in play on the ground are going to be base hits like they have been in the majors, like they have been in the minors. But I think a guy that hits 300 or close to it and has a strong OBP, a guy who can swipe you a bag, a guy who plays good defense, I think that type of player is still very valuable in baseball. But the Phillies are putting a lot of pressure on a 22-year-old kid to come up and compete right away because of having a platoon in left and having a question mark in right. They're putting a lot of pressure on a 22-year-old kid to kind of be a stalwart in their lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I really would have liked to see him come up as a left fielder. I feel like there's less pressure there. And, the Phillies got really close to calling him up last year. They eventually ended up being patient, and then he ended up getting a concussion, which kind of knocked out his possibility of Otto Kemp colliding with him in left field. I don't know if you're aware of that in AAA. So that's the reason why he didn't come up in September. That concussion just sort of did him in, so they let it ride until through the offseason. But yeah, I agree with you. I like the contact hitter with speed. Now, it's been a while since a Kenny Lofton was the story of MLB, but
sure.
I don't know that he's going to be Kenny Lofton, but there's always like a Kenny Lofton light out there. I think if he's 70% of Kenny Lofton, that he could do some things. But I guess the question in MLB is if you hit a lot of balls on the ground, fielders field them. AAA, AA, as you're going through the minor leagues, they don't field them as much. So a lot of those minor league hits for Crawford are not going to be hits in the major leagues. Even if he hits them with the same speed off the bat and same speed running to first base, he might not get some of those hits. So I think that's a thing we need to see, though. Can he adjust to the major leagues? That's the big question. And I think when you get to a point where the Phillies are, you often hesitate to really give somebody some runway to try it out, to show that he belongs. And when we think back to when the Phillies were competing before, they did trade a lot of their prospects, but they were a little hesitant to turn over a position. I mean, it's just a situation where Next thing you know, the Phillies make a trade at the deadline, and then he goes to the bench. I think
Sure.
he's going to write his own story. I think that's where a lot of the pressure is, because a team like the Phillies, if they're not getting results, I think they're going to give them plenty of leeway. But certainly June, July, that's when his job might be up for grabs. Where the Phillies could maybe say, okay, well, what kind of deal can we make, because he's just not cutting it. But
And I don't want to leave. I don't want to say just leave him alone, because that could be detrimental to your success if he's not playing well. But I do think there has to be some semblance of an arbitrary number, 150 at bats, 200 at bats, whatever the number is, that kind of gets you to that point where you said, that June-ish area, to get an understanding of who he is. Because I think for a guy like him, allowing him to hit ninth and allowing him to kind of go through the growing pains, I think could end up, kind of reaping you a reward at the end because of his athleticism, his skill set, and his ability to run the bases. I think if you give him 100 at bats and say, hey, you're not cutting it right now, I think that's a disservice to him. I think it's a disservice to your team. But I do think you're right. There has to be an arbitrary number to say, hey, we'll give you 200 at bats, we'll give you 225 at bats. And if at that point we don't feel like you're producing, then we'll look elsewhere. So I don't want to say just leave the kid alone, but I do think you have to allow him to have some natural growing pains as a rookie, kind of being thrust into a starting role.
Yeah, and again, I prefer that he plays left if that was
Sure.
if that was possible. Like I think if the Phillies knew Hader would sign for what he signed for, Bader would Hader. I'm mixing up his first and last name. But if Bader signed, if the Phillies knew they could get him for what he ultimately signed for, I think they might have done it. And then instead of Garcia done that. But then that begs the question: then where do you get that? Where do you get that potential power bat? And then it goes back to looking at Bohm and then trying to mix that up. So that's something they were not able to solve this offseason. Maybe they'll try to solve it at the trade deadline.
All right, so let's take a look. We talked a lot about the offense. Let's take a look at the starting pitching, because the obvious is that Ranger Suarez is a member of the Boston Red Sox, and kind of something we all expected. Maybe not to Boston specifically, but we all kind of expected that this would be Rangers last year as a member of the Phillies. Zach Wheeler news yesterday was good. I mean, it's good to hear that he may be ready sooner than some of us expected. My thought was like late May, early June. It seems like that may be closer to late April, early May, which is a great place for him to be. But obviously, you want to be cautious with the blood clot and thoracic outlet, rib resection and all of that. It's a surgery that you can come back from and you can compete from, but you do want to be careful with. So knowing that obviously Rangers 157 innings aren't going to be here, and whatever Zach Wheeler misses time, you're now facing a spot in your starting rotation where after Sanchez and Luzardo, you're looking at Aaron Nola to potentially bounce back. You're probably assuming that Taijuan Walker is going to get starts, especially early in the year, and that fifth starting spot in the rotation. And I think a lot of us are hoping that in the next 5 weeks of spring training, that Andrew Painter looks excellent and he makes the opening day roster. And that's the easiest way to go about this, is that Andrew Painter is your fifth starter. I'm going to ask you kind of a two-part question. Do you think that Andrew Painter is on the opening day roster? And if so, does that mean that he is definitively in that fifth starter spot?
It's hard to answer that, because you got to think the Phillies have another move in them. I mean, that you do the math: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That as of right now, Painter has to be. I mean, the Phillies have no depth. Yeah, they signed Bryce Wilson and a bunch of collection of AAA players. Alan Ronhell, anybody? I mean, does that excite you? I think that the Phillies absolutely need to add somebody. I don't like the idea of counting on Painter. I want him to go to camp and earn a spot on the roster. I don't like this situation right now where it's almost presumed. And quite frankly, I thought Taijuan Walker did a nice job last year being the swingman. I mean,
I agree.
That's a really tough ask of somebody. I know he makes a lot of money, so fans expect him to be more. But the fact that he went to the bullpen when he had to and jumped in when he had to, I like having somebody like that on my roster. But now he's your number 4. So the Phillies absolutely need to add an arm. And I would be comfortable signing somebody that's guaranteed a spot in this rotation, because I let Walker and Painter fight it out, and then you know what? If Wheeler's not ready yet, let that problem resolve itself once Wheeler returns. I think this is too important a position to roll the dice. And one of the things that made the 2025 Phillies so successful was, and I think I said this on the air last year, they'll win 90 games by accident because with that starting rotation, even and then look, they lost Nola, they lost Wheeler, and they were still strong enough to do that. I think you start chipping away at that depth a little bit too much. That makes me a little bit nervous. So as of right now, I think Painter absolutely is in, but I'm not comfortable with a team like the Phillies just saying, well, I guess he's in because we don't have anybody else.
Yeah, one guy that I was really intrigued with, and he's the type of guy who you sign and your team you look at it and you go, okay, depth signing, back end of the rotation type of guy, but he's a good innings eater. He's a crafty lefty veteran. Was Jose Quintana, who just signed a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Colorado Rockies, which I think is a good move for the Rockies. I don't know if it's going to pay off pitching in Coors Field like that, but that type of guy can solidify the back end of your bullpen. He was really strong in the second half of the season in 2024 with the Mets. I thought had a fairly good season last year with the Milwaukee Brewers. Knows how to pitch, knows how to get righties out, knows how to pitch against lefties. 5-pitch mix type of guy. And for $6 million, I'll be honest with you, I thought the Phillies should have been in on him regardless, and I thought he might get 8 or 10. For $6 million in a 1-year deal, I would have made that move in a second to solidify the back end of the back end of the rotation.
Yeah, that move for the Rockies, I mean, they're basically signing people that they're going to trade at the deadline for prospects. I think that's exactly what the Rockies are doing. And I think when you get to the point where the Rockies are signing players like that, or when the Pirates are signing the Marcell Ozuna, like we're at the point of the offseason where it's just like, okay, the lesser teams are going to start collecting whoever's left. So I think there's at least somebody out there the Phillies could collect that's left, bring up one name. I mean, Walker Buehler is still out there. Yeah. Reports are that he wants to kind of have more of a guarantee. Do you think in this Phillies rotation they could actually guarantee him a starting spot on this roster? That's where I think the big question is with him.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I like the idea of bringing Walker Buehler back. I like the idea of bringing Walker Buehler back, though, on kind of a similar role to what he had last season. Now, obviously, he only pitched a handful of times for the Phillies. What did he make? 20? I think it was 20 or 21 starts with Boston. Pretty inconsistent results. Had a couple of good starts down the stretch before the Red Sox let him go. Thought he was fairly good with the Phillies in the role that he was in. Spot start, relief role, a little bit of both, kind of that swing guy like you talked about with Taijuan Walker. I do think there's value in bringing Walker Buehler back. I don't know if there's value in giving Walker Buehler that guaranteed starting role that he's looking for. But as you said, I think a lot of these guys at this point, there's a lot of good starting pitchers left, and not just guys that you're like, okay, that's a good player that you would sign to a 1-year deal. Like, I don't think the Phillies have any chance of signing this particular player, but Zach Gallen doesn't have a job, which is crazy to me. And I know he had a little bit of a dip in his productivity last year, but there's still some good pitchers out there. Zach Littell was with the Rays and the Reds last year. Zach Littell started a playoff game last year for the Reds. 3.8 ERA, a guy that goes out there and is going to give you innings. The whip is going to be about, what's that take, 1-1, I think it was last year. He's a career 1-2 whip guy. This guy might be a little bit of a candidate for a regression because he is contact reliant, but he doesn't walk guys. He generates a decent amount of chase. And if you're looking for a guy who can solidify the back end of your bullpen with a 3.6 to 4 ERA, somewhere in that 3.6 to 4 range, I think this is the type of guy that would make a ton of sense. There's some really good starting pitchers still left to be had. I think the depth is really deep. And as you get to today, really, with pitchers and catchers reporting, I do think you're going to see a slew of starters signed in the next couple of days because they want to get themselves into spring training and into camp. Because if you don't, you end up happening with what happened to Jordan Montgomery a couple of years ago, where he signed really late with Arizona, didn't really have a spring training, and wasn't particularly good that season with Arizona. And, I think that a lot of these guys are going to want to start signing soon because, pitchers and catchers report. There's a lot of really good starters left in free agency.
Yeah, Zach Allen, the reports as of yesterday were that the market was heating up, but it sounds like the Cubs and Diamondbacks, Orioles, Padres, they're the types of teams that
Sure.
didn't see any connection to the Phillies. I would really like Zach Allen. In fact, he South Jersey guy, went to Bishop Eustace. I think that would be a really cool story, and then that might invigorate him a little bit. So, again, a reliable arm. But I like the Zach Littell idea. I mean, he's just solid, and I think that's what they need. They don't need somebody to be an ace.
Sure.
You need somebody to fill out the back end of the rotation and that you feel comfortable with. And you know what? I have no problem with there being too many starters. And if he ends up getting squeezed and into the bullpen for a while, that's great. I'm happy to see that type of depth on a major league roster. But you're seeing a lot of these guys getting scooped up in the last few days because, as you said, they want that full spring training. And quite frankly, with the World Baseball Classic happening, there's going to be a lot of innings to be pitched. So I think it makes a good sense for them to start signing now. You know, there's not a lot of smoke around the Phillies with terms of a starting pitcher, but I got to think they have to be seeing what we're seeing.
I would have to think so. I mean, and you're right. You bring up the depth. Is the Phillies got really lucky last year, and you brought it up, right? Zach Wheeler went down, and Nola wasn't very good, and then he got hurt. The Phillies, I believe, including Orion Kerkering, who I think made a start as an opener, I believe the Phillies started 10 guys last year, which is really unheard of. I mean, you think about what the Mets went through. I think they started 18 or 19 different starters. So, you're really hoping to piece together 162 games. 5 arms isn't enough. 6 arms isn't enough. You probably need, at baseline, 7 or 8 different guys who you have readily available. Like last year, they were able to get Mick Abel a couple of starts, turned him into the trade for Joan Duran. I thought getting him to the major league level was awesome because it allowed him to pitch at the big league level. He had some early success, and he became part of that package for Joan Duran. Having a guy like that is critical. Having a guy like Taijuan Walker, like Walker Buehler, guys that can come in and make starts when you need them to, or, several starts if you need them to, I think are very important. And I get the guys want, more consistency. They want more guarantees. But at this point in free agency, I think you're probably going, do I want a major league job or do I not? And if the answer is yes, you probably are going to take what you can get.
Yeah, I agree. We're almost at that point, but I feel like, again, the Pirates, Rockies, there's still a handful of teams that really missed out on everything else they wanted because the players chose to sign with better teams. I think there's still some money left to spend on a lot of those teams. And so Phillies really do need to be a little aggressive here, I think.
All right, so let's talk about one player in particular who has had maybe the most public offseason of the Phillies roster, and it's Nick Castellanos. And I think a lot of people have just assumed that Nick Castellanos is not going to be a part of this 2026 roster. I still believe he's probably not going to be a part of this 2026 roster. But pitchers and catchers report today. Every other position player reports in a few days. There's not much time until spring training officially kicks off and is underway. I don't know what the game plan was with Nick Castellanos. I assume the Phillies were looking for a trade partner, have had very little to no success in finding a trade partner. But this has been a really weird offseason for a guy that most of us, including Dave Dombrowski, who publicly said they're kind of looking to move on, we kind of have all expected him not to be on this team. This has been a really weird offseason for Nick Castellanos and the
Phillies. Got that right. I mean, it's rare that a team publicly says they're trying to trade somebody of any kind. I almost wonder what type of messaging they're having for Castellanos. Now, we don't know the extent of what led to his one game. Wasn't a suspension; it was just a benching. So it wasn't so serious they had to suspend him, but there's probably something that just broke that relationship. And to me, it's kind of telling that you don't hear any other Phillies kind of saying like, "Oh, we really hope he'll stay" or something to that effect, right? I feel like he's run his course in Philadelphia. He's not the type that's going to enjoy not playing every day. And so he really does need to move on, I think, at this point. But the fact that he's still in the roster, I mean, the Phillies might be waiting for this, as kind of we were just saying, the teams that are collecting parts at this point. I think he's probably going to have to go to a lesser team that might hope that he has a rebound and they can trade him at the trade deadline. I mean, that might be what what type of trade match there is. I mean, would the Marlins take him and then, hope he has some success in his hometown, hoping to spin him later? But then the question becomes, how much of the salary are they going to pay? I mean, are the Phillies hoping? I mean, in an era where the minimum salary is like $750,000, it's north of that. Like, how much are they actually going to save? I mean,
Right.
I mean, if another team agrees to pay $1 million of his salary, well, I mean, that's really not much more than the minimum. So yeah, I don't know if this is an extended message to him saying, hey, yeah, well, I'm sure behind the scenes, his agent has been talking to teams, trying to sell himself. He's been out there publicly doing interviews saying, yeah, I'm willing to move to first base or happy to be a designated hitter. I think he and his agent are marketing himself right now, trying to get somebody to bite. And part of this could be a message from the Phillies like, okay, well, hey, look, it's not that easy to trade you.
And I think you're right. The money is a big part of it. And obviously it's when you sign a guy like that, he's coming off the career year in Cincinnati. I think a lot of us maybe expected a little bit of a dip, but the productivity obviously really did not match what you were hoping for in Cincinnati. The home run numbers went down kind of expectedly. Cincinnati, I know Citizens Bank Park is a hitter-friendly ballpark. Cincinnati's a really hitter-friendly ballpark. But the doubles went down as time has gone on. The RBI production went down as time had gone on. And I think for a lot of Phillies fans, the chase rates are frustrating. The plate discipline has become frustrating. But I think the money is the biggest thing. I think if this guy were making $10 million per season, I think you would have seen him get moved already because a team would say, hey, we'll pay 2, you eat 8. And the Phillies would say, okay, deal, give us a low-level prospect. Moving on from $17 million or $18 million is probably a much more difficult feat, not for the other teams, but for the Phillies to say, hey, we're going to pay this guy. It's the scene in Moneyball where Brad Pitt goes up to David Justice and says, nah, man, the Yankees are paying half your salary. It's like, do you really want to pay 85% of the guy's salary? And then, well, if you want to move him, I think you're going to have to, because the other option is release him and pay 100% of $20 million, and he's playing somewhere else anyway.
Yeah, so I think this will eventually end this week, maybe in the next day or two. I think that they might end up. It wouldn't be something if after all this they do just cut him. I mean, I think this was the longest cut in the history of baseball. It took them all these months to do so. That's probably what's going to happen. I see him signing with Miami or something that's comfortable to him, and then
sure,
maybe he'll have a resurgence. Maybe he won't, but I mean, he's old in baseball years.
And I think there's he probably understands his career is closer to the beginning than the end. I could also see him being a guy going, hey, if I'm not going to play every day, I'm not going to play. You know what I mean? I'll finish out this season because $20 million is a heck of a lot of money. And I know he's made a good chunk of change over his career, but walking away from $20 million, and I say this as a average Joe, it's all relative, of course, but walking away from $20 million is probably something that most people don't want to do. So if he can, ride it out for 1 year, I would imagine he probably will. But I do see him as the type of guy who goes, yeah, if I'm not going to play I don't even need to play 162 anymore, but if I'm not going to play 130, 135, I'm just going to hang him up and say it's been a fun run. I'm done. I could see him retire after this season.
Yeah, he's very public with his family. I can see him wanting to spend time with his kids. Maybe he's run his course, and that's okay. Overall, he did better than 99% of Major League Baseball players.
Sure,
that's it.
He'll be a tenured player, right? 10 years. I think that's tenure in baseball. He'll be a tenured player by the time his career benefits. All right, one final thing for us here today on the inaugural Run It Back podcast. Rob Thomson made a comment the other day. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? Yesterday. That he believes that this team is better now than they were last year. And I think it's a simple question with a more complex answer, but I'll ask you the simple question. Do you believe the Phillies are better now than they were last year?
At this moment, and I'll probably be controversial saying this, but maybe a tick, just because I think the bullpen is better. The offense probably the same-ish. I don't love I don't love a team with many platoons. At least they're down to 2 platoons now instead of 3. But Joan Duran, I think, is a difference maker in the bullpen. I think probably they win some games that they didn't before, and I think too. I think Orion Kirkering is going to be forced to be much more mature than last year. I think after all that, the way the season ended, I think he's going to come to spring training ready to play ball, because at this point either he's got to be in or he's got to be out. So I like the bullpen a lot. I think they still have enough good starting pitching to muddle through if they have to. But I say just a tick. I'm because everybody else is a year older. So you're going to get what you get from Real Muto, probably playing less. Schwarber probably can't match last season, and I don't think that's disrespectful, because he had the best season of his career. I think Harper could be a little bit better this year. I think there's still some treading water going on. I think Bryson Stott will be better than last year. So I think we're treading water, maybe just a tick above, just because I think Joan Duran is the difference for me.
So I agree with you on the bullpen. I actually, and I don't know if you know this about me, Frank, or not, but I am like the biggest Matt Strahm fan in the world. I was very disappointed when I got it. I understood
number
why
7 reliever, according to that one poll.
Yeah, apparently he's better than Joan Duran. Sure. And I am like the biggest Matt Strahm fan in the world. And so when they traded him, especially bringing in Jonathan Bolin back, it felt to me like they had another move up their sleeve, and turns out they really didn't. But even with the removal of Matt Strahm, I do think a full year, as you said, a full year of Joan Duran is going to do wonders for this bullpen. I think Brad Keller was the best move they made this offseason. I'm super excited to see what Keller can do. I think Orion Kirkering has another statistically good year, because he was good in the regular season last year. And if he can kind of clear that headspace of the end of the year, I do expect him to be good again this year. Alvarado, full season of him, you ride the wave with him a little bit, but I think the stuff is unquestionable. I would almost argue at times he's got the best stuff in the bullpen when he's on. And I'm a big Tanner Banks fan as well. I think he's just a guy who gets you out of those muddy situations, gets you out of the first and third with one out, and he's able to do it pretty successfully. I think the bullpen, the guys that we just mentioned, those 5, are going to be really strong for this team. I'm also really, really intrigued in if Zach McCambley makes this team. I really like his stuff. I don't know if he's ready to be a major leaguer just yet, but if they want him on the team, obviously with the Rule 5, they're going to have to put him on the opening day roster. I'm really intrigued to see what he can do. And then they made a couple of those, like I talked about, bringing in Backus, bringing in Shugart. Like, those type of guys could round out a bullpen, could be your guys that start in AAA and bring you depth. I think the bullpen's better. I do. I think the starting rotation is worse by default, just by losing Ranger and not knowing how you're going to pick up those 157 innings. And I think the lineup as constructed is pretty much the same. And so you could call it a wash. I would say that with the fact that, as you brought up, they're a year older, I would say that it's slightly worse. I do expect this team to still be a playoff team. I think they're in high 80s to low 90s win total type of team. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a grind than it was last year and the 2 years ago, because their pitching's not as strong. Their starting pitching's not as strong. I do think this is still a playoff team. And so to say that they're bad is not true. But to say that they're a step back from where they were a season ago is something I do believe.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have to realize too is we're comparing the post-trade deadline team to the opening roster, which may not be the opening roster. There still could be a move or 2 left. So I always kind of factor in that Dave Dombrowski is going to do something at the deadline. So you kind of feel like last year, the bullpen absolutely needed something at the back end, and he went out and got the big guy.
Yep.
And, he's somebody approaching retirement himself. A lot of these players approaching their retirements, or at least they're starting to be on the other end of the peak of their careers. I think he's going to do something at the trade deadline. So I still have some confidence. Whatever's missing, he will kind of fill in the gaps in July. So I still think that they have the potential to be, again, mainly treading water. I when you win 96, it's really hard to say that you're going to do better, right? I mean, because you look in the East, the Mets certainly got better, and the Braves aren't going to be as bad, because the Braves still have a lot of talent as well. So I think that I think this is one of those things where I want to see. I already want to see who's on the roster August 1st.
Sure.
But yeah, losing Ranger, that's obviously the big tough one, and who knows if they add another starter, I think we might feel a lot better. But I'm not overly emphatic that they're better than last year. Maybe just a tick above. Again, just because I feel like the bullpen going into last year was very sketchy, and I think they lost a lot of games early. That once they got to Ron, they didn't lose anymore. So I think there is that leaves me just a little bit of confidence. But I'm certainly not emphatic. I'm not saying this is a 100-win team, but if I'm just comparing the roster now versus where they ended up, I feel like they've mostly traded water. I'll tick to the positive because Zach Wheeler will come back, and I feel like he'll be there when it matters the most. Last year, losing him down the stretch, I think ending the year without Zach Wheeler, this year knowing you're going to have Zach Wheeler, I do prefer to know he's coming back than not having him.
Well, my friend, this was a fun one. Our maiden voyage on the Run It Back podcast. A lot more fun to come. I had a great time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, because I could talk about this team all day. I love this kind of flux that they're in terms of being a content creator. It certainly gives us it's not a lack of content for us here on.
Yes, it's great to talk. Like I said, I miss doing this, and I really excited to be back doing this. And as the Phillies run it back, so do we, Tyler.
So for Frank Klose, myself, Tyler Zulli, saying thank you so much for listening into the first edition of the Run It Back podcast. We'll be back next week for some more content. Spring training will be underway. We're getting closer and closer to first pitch in Clearwater, which means we're getting closer and closer to first pitch at Citizens Bank Park for the 2026 season. So again, for Frank Klose, I'm Tyler Zulli saying thank you so much for listening in. We'll be back next week right here on the Run It Back podcast. See you.